All right. I think it's on. Perfect. Beautiful. Okay, there's a little delay. Great. Good morning, everyone. Happy Virtual 2018. Thank you for joining me today. That was an excellent keynote. I hope that y'all had some great takeaways for that. And thank you for joining me today. I'm just going to jump right in. And let me see. Cool, perfect. So I would like to share a fantastic strategy that I have been using for quite some time now in the classroom. And it's a combination of using sign language and poetry to enhance language development. And this could be used for all grades. I primarily have used it for the early grades, but you can definitely use it with the upper grades as well. So let's dig right in. Just a little bit about me. My name is Justin Garcia, and I'm currently in Arizona, but I teach in Chiang Mai, Thailand. Here's a little photo of me and my husband, Barack. I'm happily married, and we are happily bedogged. We have a sweet little pup named Starbuck, who we adopted from the street a couple years ago. And we live in beautiful northern Thailand. Currently, it's nice and rainy, lots of blue skies and lots of green forests. So if you ever decide to come to Thailand, definitely let us know, and we can give you some tips. Anyway, our objectives for today are, first we'll briefly define what TPR is, what TPR means, and some of the research behind it. And I'll show you just a simple step-by-step process for the strategy. And we'll practice the strategy as a whole group as well. So we'll get a little bit of practice with that. And then we'll also understand the importance of sign culture as well, because I think that's an incredible highlight that we can really take advantage of in this. And briefly, before we get into this, I am not fluent in sign in any way. What I have researched and done has been purely on my own. So if the sign language that I use comes from the sign dictionary, I don't communicate. I'm not able to communicate in sign language. I'm just using hand movements as a tool in the classroom. So if there is anything that I could do better, please send me a message on Twitter or send me an email. I really want to improve my practice, but also make sure that I am, fully respecting sign culture as well. And we'll get a little bit more into that later on. So what is TPR? First objective. TPR stands for Total Physical Response. And it simply means using physical movement to react to verbal input. So a combination of our hand gestures and what we say is TPR. And we use this all the time in the classroom, but also in real life too. My background is Sicilian and Puerto Rican, so we use lots of hand gestures and movement, and typically the more grandiose our hand movements are, the more importance our words tend to hold and the more passionate we become. So we use it really every day in our lives and in the classroom too. And it's a strategy that's been around forever, developed by James Asher and researched. It's been researched heavily, and it's been practiced forever now. And James Asher says, TPR enables students and adults to understand language in just a few exposures. And he makes the comparison of infants. And generally, infants master hundreds of hand movements and body movements before they're even able to speak. So I think that is a very powerful tool then, because even as children, we master so many body movements. We're able to communicate with our body before we can even express ourselves in words. And that's very powerful. And that's something that we can use for students, especially language learners who may not have command of the language that's being spoken, but as a child, as a grown child or as a teenager, most people have nearly infinite ways to communicate with their bodies. And TPR could be used for really any language domain, any of the language domains, specifically reading, listening, and speaking. It can be used to introduce new vocabulary. I use it to introduce phonics practice authentically. And it's also an opportunity to learn about signing. Not a lot of people know about signing in school. It's not something that's necessarily taught. So it could be a really excellent way to introduce what sign language is, and also sign culture, because sign culture and deaf culture, because there is a culture behind it as well. So I have this quick video of a teacher using TPR while teaching Spanish. So I'm just going to show a very brief clip here. And she's teaching reading in a small group. And what I love about this video is that she's using it to teach Spanish, not English. So it really transcends all subject and content areas in the classroom. So take a look. Notice really what she does with her body, but also how she interacts with the students. So in that instance, she's interacting with the students. The students are participating with her, and there's that element of choral reading as well, in addition to tying in what she says with some body language, some total physical response to enhance understanding. Check out the next one. So again, choral reading, everybody's getting an opportunity to speak and practice using their body. Whether or not she's actually using sign language, I'm not entirely sure. You don't have to. Total physical response is any body movement, but I've found that using sign language has helped me kind of have a universal system of what words can be portrayed using your body. I sometimes would make up my own body language, and a lot of teachers do that as well. I tend to forget things really easily, so if I make something up, I may forget it. But if I'm using a sign language, or if I'm using sign, then I know there is a surefire way of articulating what words mean and what I'm trying to get across. Here we go. So what exactly is this strategy anyway? Using TPR and using sign language and using poetry? Well, the process is quite simple. First, you could select a poem. It could be a poem of any length, grade appropriate, ideally related to content. It doesn't even have to be a poem. It can be an excerpt. It could be a paragraph. It's up to the teacher and the context. And then the next piece is picking out those tier 1 and tier 2 words that you think need to be highlighted in the classroom, again, depending on the context. It might be some tier 2 vocabulary that's being highlighted in the unit. It might be some words that you think the class needs to focus on or your grade level needs to focus on. Again, that's up to you. And then you practice together. You practice reading the excerpt and you practice the signing. And then when you're finished with the reading that you're doing, you can hang it up on the wall or place it in the classroom for future use. And I'll get into that later. So this example, I selected just a simple poem about clouds called Clouds Are Floating, to the tune of Frere Jacques. And I picked this because in a lot of elementary classrooms, there's typically a weather unit, and clouds might be a highlight of that. And I thought it might be a great opportunity to show how to incorporate this technique with something content related. So it's a very simple poem. And, oh, here we go. And so the first step is selecting this poem. It could be a poem you find online, maybe it's something you have in your curriculum. It's up to you. And then highlighting keywords. So in this particular poem, I highlighted clouds and floating. Those are some tier 2 words. Up and high, above, in, sky. So there's some prepositions in there, as well as some content-related nouns. It's important to highlight really the most important, the words that you need to know. I've never signed an entire poem. I've just signed those keywords because, again, I'm not fluent in sign language. And I think in certain contexts it might be appropriate, but in this case, we're just practicing words. And then after you select the words, you practice signing them. And I use sign language dictionaries and to help me with figuring out what the signs are for these words. So I will show you kind of what that looks like here. So I picked out these, I linked the dictionary entries to the slideshow that lead directly into the dictionary, but let me go back here and we'll practice it together. Oop. Where is my screen share? That is my dog. Here it is. Nope. Here it is. Perfect. All right. So the first word is clouds. So go ahead and sign with me. This is clouds. You kind of put your hands up in the sky, pretending like you're making a big ball. Clouds. Clouds are floating. Floating is where you put your hands like this and you make a little wavy sign with your body. I think this means floating above water, but I wasn't able to find floating in the air. So if I am doing the wrong sign, please let me know. So clouds are floating, clouds are floating, and then up. It's pointing up. Up so high, up so high. And you would practice that with your students. And the really fascinating thing about this is that I made this presentation probably a month and a half ago, and I didn't need to go back to look at those words. I haven't practiced them since. And I recall what those words mean because I'm able to connect it with the sign language. So for me, I'm very visual and kinesthetic. So I'm able to learn what those words are in just 1 or 2 exposures. And that just highlights how powerful that tool is. So one more time. Clouds are floating. Clouds are floating. Up so high. Up so high. And I might play a game with the students. So I might say as a teacher, show me clouds, and let people think about it, and then they'll show clouds. Or reverse it. I might do this and expect students to say clouds. So just playing a game and reinforcing those skills. So let's get back to the slideshow, screen share, here we go. Beautiful. That was just a little demonstration of kind of what you would typically do in that type of lesson. So let's see, making sure I screen shared correctly. Okay, so after you practice, this also is a really fantastic opportunity to highlight some phonics and grammatical pieces authentically. So in this particular poem, I saw an opportunity to go into OA and OU vowels, Y endings, IGH endings, ING endings. And this is an opportunity to practice phonics authentically through songs and through poetry, as opposed to, and this is what I've noticed in typical curriculums, is arbitrarily picking out vowels and consonants for the week and practicing them in isolation. But in this case, you're learning vocabulary, you're tying it in with content, but you're also tying in the phonics piece with the content and the vocabulary. And I found that students are much more prone to learning their phonics skills through poetry rather than selecting words that essentially have no meaning beyond a word list. So again, I'm not selecting every phonics piece. I mean, you can spend weeks dissecting a simple poem like this and talking about all the different phonics pieces in it, but pick a few and that you find the most important in your context, and you can add more later with more poems or more songs. And then lastly, hang it out. So in this case, my colleague was practicing this strategy, and when she finished the poems, she put them up in her classroom. She put them on anchor charts. And this is another excellent resource for students, because then students can look at the poem and use it for spelling. They can use it for just reading practice if they wanted to. I've done this throughout the whole year, and I leave these poems up all year. So at the beginning of the year, our walls are empty. And then near the end of the year, our walls are completely filled with these poems that we've practiced over the course of the school year. And students are able to recite them, they're able to read them fluently, they're able to sign them, they're able to read them to each other, they're able to read them, or they're able to use them for spelling. So it becomes basically an authentic word wall. And again, the students used it constantly in their writing, and it was great practice for them. So the results of using this, I used it for 2 or 3 years. My colleague used it for her first year teaching last year, and it really developed confident speakers. You might have emerging language learners who are just beginning to learn English. They're able to participate. And advanced language speakers are able to read with or practice on their fluency. So it's really automatically differentiated. It really has helped students become more fluent readers because of the practice and the song aspect to it. And it helped with phonemic awareness as well, because we were able to practice phonics authentically. And oddly enough, it's helped with classroom management, especially in the elementary class. There's always that 2 minutes of awkward time before a transition to music or PE or to the end of the day. And a lot of, when I was a first year teacher, I'd play Heads Up, 7 Up, or like Simon Says or something. But in this case, we would read the poems and sign them. A student would select a poem and decide to read it to the class, or we would select some together, read it in a line, or we might read it in a hallway and practice the signing. So it became a really fun thing that we did in the classroom as well. And also, lastly, it really helped my students understand the cultural fluency and importance of sign language, and how that's used with those who are hearing impaired. So we'll go, and I'll get into that later, near the end of the presentation. And this is kind of my schedule that I would use. I put together a little schedule of how it looked in my classroom. So on Monday, we would choral read and practice signing the new words for the first day. That's all we would do. We choral read it a couple times and just practice those words. And we practice again on Tuesday. And Tuesday is usually when I would introduce phonics, or the following day I would introduce the phonics piece to it. On Wednesday, we would again choral read and sign, and I would also cover certain words. So students would have to, by that point, students had memorized most of the poem. So I would cover sight words and I would cover vocabulary words for students to write. And then on Thursday, by that point, we would be pretty fluent in the poem or in the song, and we would partner read. They would read to each other. and we would sign and continue with phonics. And on Friday, I would save that day for assessment. So whatever assessment expectations or context has for phonics, that's usually the day that I would practice it. And a lot of times I would, for the assessment piece, I would have them write the poem on their own, or I might pull kids aside to practice those phonics pieces independently. So again, it depends on your context. This is an example of cover the word. So I would have the poem up, I would have maybe Post-it notes covering the words, and students would write the word on the Post-it note. And they would have to remember what the word is, but also remember it visually. So that helps with spelling and with sight word identification. And lastly, the last objective are the cultural benefits of this. This is a great opportunity for us as teachers and us as advocates to share, different stories of hearing impaired people and what that looks like. So I included a number of books in this presentation that are based around people who are hearing impaired. And I researched these books, and they're some of the best books that features lead characters who use sign language to communicate and to live these lives. And it's a great opportunity to highlight that in the classroom and know that this isn't just a fun thing that we're doing in the class. This actually has meaning, and this is what the meaning is. And I got a lot of these books off of this website on the left here, Raising Luminaries, Books for Littles. This particular advocate is an incredible resource. She vets tons and tons and tons and tons of books for authenticity. And I get a lot of her children's books recommendations. I get a lot of recommendations from her specifically. And here's some research if you're more interested in learning about total physical response and the study and the research that goes behind that. It's a strategy that has stood the test of time, and there's a ton of research, old and new, that support it. So definitely take a look. It's really fascinating, actually, to see what people have researched on it. And my contact information, feel free to contact me on Twitter, on my website, through my blog, or through my personal email. And here's some of my favorite chats that I participate in regularly. Queer EDU chat is a new one. So we talk about queerness and advocacy and equity in the classroom. So definitely hope to see you there in future chats starting in August. ELL Chat, COTI Chat, and ELL Chat Book Club have been around forever, and there's a ton of participants, and definitely check those out. And that is it. Let me stop sharing. I will go ahead and link the presentation in the YouTube link if I have not done that already. And thank you so much for joining me today. Have a fantastic rest of your virtual conference. Enjoy a cup of coffee this morning while you get ready for the next conference. That's what I'm going to do. And the next presentation. And I will talk to you soon. Bye. Thank you.